is Brian O'Mara, a nationally recognized geological and technical tunnel expert with over 30 years of experience in consulting and construction management support. He has worked thousands of hours underground as a resident inspector and staff engineer for deep tunnel and shaft projects in the Great Lakes region and testified as an expert witness in the Enbridge Line 5 tunnel cases. He highlights key technical safety and engineering concerns related to the proposed tunnel. And Brian, I'm going to let you take it away here. And you might first unmute and you should be able to share your screen.
Sorry. Thank you for the introduction. Pull my presentation here. From the beginning. Okay. I'd like to start my presentation highlighting a few of these images on my cover slide. And these actually get right to the heart of my main concern is a catastrophic failure of the Line 5 tunnel. And we've got some experience with this in Michigan and in the Great Lakes. And we frankly have global experience with similar types of disasters as well. And I just do not want to have a repeat of history here. The image in the lower left corner here was taken in a tunnel fire that occurred in the Italian and French Alps. This was a relatively small fire from one truck that was carrying margarine and flour that caught fire in a tunnel that had inadequate fire suppression, fire detection, and ventilation. It caused extreme damage to the tunnel liner. It brought the tunnel liner concrete lining down. There was a complete failure. Now, this was up in a mountain. If this had happened in the Great Lakes beneath hundreds of feet of saturated soil and sediment, the water and rock and soil would have come rushing in through that hole that you can see in the ceiling of the tunnel here. So that is something that could certainly happen. We've got some other more local examples, and if you look at the images in the upper right-hand corner, this is in regards to the Lake Huron water tunnel disaster. Some of you may be familiar with. It was a deep tunnel, that extends 4 miles out from Fort Gratiot near Port Huron underneath Lake Huron. The tunnel was nearly completed in construction when a drill bit struck a spark that ignited a pocket of methane gas. The methane had come up into the tunnel from the underlying Antrim Shale, and 22 of the workers in the tunnel were killed in this accident. What you're looking at here is the cofferdam structure that was damaged at the surface, even though the explosion occurred 4 miles away from this area. You can see the damage that was done, and it was significant. There was this received national coverage at the time, but it's been over 50 years. I'm afraid a lot of our politicians and our regulators and frankly, even the labor unions may have forgotten about this incident. It's one of the worst industrial accidents in the state of Michigan. And there's a memorial to the folks that did pass away in this incident in Fort Gratiot. So I just wanted to start the presentation off with this acknowledgement that things could go horribly bad. And this is what I'm trying to avoid. I'm not anti-tunnel. I spent the last 5 decades working on tunnel projects around the United States. Here's just a brief summary of my qualifications. I'm not going to go through them all, but as Denise mentioned, I did serve as an expert witness in the MPSC matter regarding Line 5. I was specifically asked to review a couple of questions that became before the commission. Will the tunnel survive, or is it vulnerable to damage from a catastrophic failure from explosion or fire? The answer is yes, it is very vulnerable. It doesn't take much of a fire to cause concrete to fail, and the concrete on this tunnel has reinforcing steel, and that will melt, and the total integrity of the tunnel can be compromised and can virtually fail within minutes, depending on the strength of the fire. And that is certainly something that could happen in this Enbridge Line 5 tunnel. The other question I was asked to testify on was, will the sediments and the rocks surrounding the tunnel serve as a secondary containment to keep the oil and gas liquids from migrating into the straits? The answer to that question was also no. The Enbridge tunnel will be operating at over 500 psi pressure. The overburden pressure of the tunnel, and that's basically the weight of the rocks and the sediment and the water above the tunnel, is only about 250 psi at maximum. So if there is a failure of the tunnel due to a fire or an explosion, the pipeline will still be pumping out oil and gas at a pressure that's twice as high as the overburden pressure. So that material from the product from the pipeline will continue to exit the pipeline, and it'll cut its way through rock, it'll cut its way through the sediment, and it'll make its way into the water column. And as we know in the past, Enbridge has had a difficult time recognizing when they're having a massive leak. The Kalamazoo River release, it took them 17 hours before they realized they had a problem. So this pipeline pumps out 15,000 gallons a minute of oil and gas liquids. So you can imagine how much could be released over just a few minutes. We're talking at least 50,000 gallons of oil. So that is my real concern. And I will be highlighting other issues that I've identified over the last several years, looking at all the Enbridge documents. I spent hundreds of hours reviewing their designs, their geotechnical reports. And the more I've looked at this project, the more I am concerned, and that remains so today. All right, tunneling beneath open water. It might sound easy, but it's actually a big deal. People have been trying to do it for hundreds of years, and much of the time they've been failing to do it. It's the most complicated, dangerous, and technically challenging type of construction that we can do on planet Earth. So this is not insignificant. Enbridge has no tunnel construction experience. They are a pipeline contractor. They essentially dig a ditch and lay their pipe in it, and they bury it. So they have no expertise. They have no real knowledge of what they're doing. They've hired some experts that have tried to help them. And even those, if you look in their past publications and documents, share some of the same concerns that I have raised. And the real challenge of this is that there has not been a tunnel completed under the proposed conditions of this Line 5 tunnel anywhere in the US or anywhere else, frankly. Nothing that is this deep, that is under this much pressure, that is facing the challenging geology. There's methane gas that has been discovered, and they're really taking a risk to complete this project. And I have serious concerns as to whether they can do it safely and even complete the project. Another thing I think I want to make quite clear is that this is very unusual to put an oil and gas transmission pipeline in a tunnel. It's almost never been done anywhere on the planet. And there's a reason for that. Most of you probably have experience going through a road tunnel or maybe a train tunnel, and you will see signs that say hazardous materials are prohibited from going through the tunnel. For us here in Detroit, where I'm at, you see that when you're going through the Windsor Tunnel. And the reason is because tunnels are confined spaces. They are subject to accumulating gases, and those gases can ignite and create fires and explosions and have catastrophic results. So the fact that anyone's even proposing to do this is pretty outrageous. And the federal pipeline regulatory agency also doesn't have experience with this because it's not been done before. Okay. My biggest concern about this whole project lies in the fact that the state of Michigan commissioned a study back in 2017 looking at the various alternatives for Line 5. And the alternative that was recommended was to place a tunnel under the straits and put a pipeline in the tunnel. But that alternative recommendation was qualified with several conditions that had to be met, or should have been met, I should say. The first one was that adequate pre-designed studies would have to be completed prior to construction. Well, that hasn't been done. The second was that the tunnel would be constructed completely with incompetent bedrock, which means solid rock that is not heavily fractured. There was also not to be any toxic gases or flammable gases, and that's what methane is, and Enbridge found methane. They said there couldn't be extraordinary groundwater infiltration or pressures. These were expected to be minimal. Well, they found just the opposite. They expect high groundwater infiltration with extremely high pressures. And the last thing was that the tunnel annulus, which is the interior space of the tunnel between the pipeline and the walls of the tunnel, basically all this air here, that would be backfilled with grout or concrete to essentially make the tunnel solid, and that would prevent it from being vulnerable to fires, flood, freezing, terrorist attacks, all the threats that I've been raising that could happen in the Enbridge design would be largely eliminated if they just followed that. The last element was driving the tunnel uphill rather than the Enbridge design, which is essentially a deep V. That's dangerous for the workers because they could be trapped on the downhill drive, or as if they're on the uphill leg, as they're going north, they could be trapped and cut off and no way to be rescued. So it's just a bad design from someone who's worked in these tunnels for hundreds of hours. That's the last thing you want to be doing, is trapped in a tunnel where there's no exit. All right. We touched on a lot of these in the last slide. So we talked about all the ways that the current design doesn't meet the conditions that were laid out in the state of Michigan recommendation. I don't know how Eagle and the Corps of Engineers and the MPSC and the FSMA and the Michigan Straits Corridor Authority, everyone seems to have overlooked this very important issue, is that what Enbridge is proposing doesn't come close to complying with what was recommended in that report. Everybody's sort of forgotten about that, maybe because it happened in 2017, but these are real issues and they have to be addressed. And if they're not, I'm afraid you're going to be in a situation where you could have a catastrophic failure. Over here in this corner, I actually took an excerpt from the report that was done in 2017, and it talks about why it's important to seal the tunnel. It's to maintain long-term tunnel stability, eliminate inflows, and minimize other threats to the pipeline. And those other threats are fire, floods, and explosions, which the Enbridge design does not address. We talked a little bit about this also. It's an unprecedented engineering challenge. This hasn't been done before. I don't trust Enbridge to get it right. It's going to be a challenge for anyone. And I have concerns about the contractor that's been selected. I have concerns about the limited design that's been done, the pre-designed studies. We talked about the open annulus of the tunnel, which exposes the pipeline to all of these various threats. The dissolved methane, which Enbridge found in their own studies, is in the groundwater beneath the straits. That groundwater will continue to seep into the tunnel as long as the tunnel's there. And when the groundwater seeps in, if the dissolved methane is in it, the methane comes into the atmosphere of the tunnel, and that can create an explosive condition, which could trigger a fire and or a explosion, which could destroy the pipeline, destroy the tunnel. Another concern I have is if they can actually get the tunnel constructed, they have to basically push the pipeline down through the tunnel and up the other end over 4 miles. That's going to put tremendous stress on the steel pipeline and every one of the fittings and the joints. And that could cause a failure sometime in the future as the pipeline is operated. A big concern that I identified, which seems, again, not gotten the attention of any of the regulators, is there is no real adequate ventilation system of the tunnel. There is no fire suppression system in the tunnel. And that is deeply concerning. The Enbridge answer to that, my concern was, well, we're going to seal off both ends of the tunnel, and if there's a fire, it'll burn itself out. I couldn't believe they actually proposed that as their method of controlling the fire, but that's frankly ridiculous. So the tunnels, they did specify that the concrete would withstand a 60-minute fire. Now, if there is any type of release out of this pipeline, it's going to produce a pool of liquid that will burn far longer than 60 minutes. And if there's no fire suppression system in the tunnel, that fire will heat the concrete to create the failure that I've been talking about, where the structure will come down, the pipeline will be destroyed, and it'll still be under high pressure, and the contents of the pipeline will reach its way through the liner out into the rock and soil and ultimately the water column of the above the straits. All right, I'm going to skip this because we talked about that as well. Just to wrap up here, these deadly and catastrophic tunnel fires and methane explosions are not uncommon. If any of you have been to Europe and have taken the tunnel, the train from London to France, the Eurotunnel, or the Chunnel it used to be called, this is a picture of that after a fire that occurred in the tunnel. This was a while ago. Nobody died in this fire, but there was extreme damage, as you can see. And the big change that came about after this fire was they decided to put an automated fire suppression system in throughout the tunnel. That's a good idea, and that's one that Enbridge has not incorporated into their design. We talked about the fact that the open annulus leaves the pipeline exposed to all the threats of fire and freezing and explosion, and that's the biggest fatal flaw with the proposed design. Here's the last slide, essentially capturing the main points of my concerns. The design does not come close to meeting the conditions that were specified in the 2017 alternatives analysis. In fact, every one of the conditional assumptions and criteria were not met, and essentially This proposed design is not safe for the workers. It's not fit for purpose. It is asking for trouble by not addressing the concerns that have been identified by Enbridge in their pre-design studies. The tunnel workers face death or injury from floods, fires, and explosions and collapse, both during construction and after the tunnel is completed, if it can be completed, during the pipeline operations. They want to keep that tunnel open. There'll be workers going in and out of there. And that's, again, a recipe for disaster. The main concern I have is a catastrophic release of oil and gas from the tunnel into the environment. And that's the reason they wanted to put the pipeline in the tunnel. But because of the way they're proposing to do it, they could actually end up with a even bigger problem than the current existing pipelines, believe it or not. And lastly, the real concern I have is that the stakeholders and the regulators, I listed them out here. I want to call them out: Eagle, the MPSC, the Michigan Straits Corridor Authority, FSMA, they're the federal pipeline safety people, the Army Corps of Engineers, the labor unions, everyone's worried about the jobs, the local politicians, the state and federal politicians, and especially Enbridge. None of them have completed an extensive or adequate evaluation of all these risks and the consequences that go into this tunnel. And that's a standard engineering practice. How it has been overlooked, and they're this many years down the line, and it sounds like this thing may be expedited for construction, is a deep concern of mine. And we're going to have to try to get their attention, perhaps the Corps of Engineers. I'm not sure what the next step is, but these risks are real. They haven't gone away, and hopefully we'll get somebody to take them seriously. And that concludes my presentation.
I warned you, scarier than me.
I'm sorry to be such a downer, but this
It's
is real. I've seen it, and early on in my career in Milwaukee, over 30 years ago, we had a tunnel where 3 people were killed, and it scared me straight, and I've been taking it seriously ever since. And I just can see that this could happen again, and I want to do everything I can to prevent it. So
we so appreciate you coming out tonight. I know we call on you to make these remarks so often, and I'll share one of the pieces when we were in court over the Michigan Public Service Commission's piece just about a month ago now. One of the pieces that the Enbridge lawyers kept insisting was, but everyone agrees that the tunnel is safer than the existing dual pipelines. And I heard the entire courtroom go, right, because we know that that's not true. And again, we're here tonight so that you could share that kind of evidence with the advocacy community that will take it and do what it can with those pieces.
Well, I just want to point out one thing. That assumption and conclusion by Enbridge is an example of circular logic, because they're going back to the 2017 report that reached a similar conclusion. But that conclusion was based on the tunnel being filled with concrete, okay? Which is, it's hard to have an explosion in a tunnel if it's filled with concrete, because there's no air for the explosion. And Enbridge, they don't recognize it. The regulators don't recognize it. And why they haven't incorporated it into design, it will add millions of dollars to the cost. I suspect that's why it is, but that's a key provision that is lost on just about everybody who's looked at this. So.
Yeah, well, thank you again so much. And